Thank you, Lucy. Lucia, I think we have time for 2 or 3 short questions, if any. Yes?
Concern about linkage of the positives, and also counseling as a result of a positive.
Sure. So as part of the study, the results weren't provided in doing the self-test, but we provided HIV counseling and testing for those who wanted it as part of the study, and they were linked to local clinics and referred.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I was just curious if you could speak to the concerns. You mentioned the finger stick and the Lancet, but perhaps for the oral fluid or the other tests that were evaluated in the larger study, it'd be interesting to hear if there were other concerns that came up.
Yeah, so I think the biggest concerns were around the people's difficulty with the instructions that were provided. And the biggest, there were a few instances of problems with some of the other tests, but certainly the finger prick was one of the biggest barriers. But for more information, the AIDS and Behavior paper gives a lot more detail around that, and from all of the country sites as well.
Okay, if no other questions, let's thank Lucia for the excellent presentation and move on to the, yes, I'm sorry, I can, yes, there. Yeah, sorry.
I'm from Myanmar, Professor of Pathology and Director of the laboratory. So I'd like to know what kinds of the quality assurance is doing this individual testing. And the second one is what kind of the follow-up procedures are done if the client is found to be the positive.
Sorry, could you repeat the first question?
The first question is what kind of the quality assurance is doing in this self-testing?
The quality
assurance, yes. And the second question is what further recommendation or what further instructions are done if the client is found to be the positive?
Okay, so there were no results associated with the self-tests that we conducted, but people were offered testing afterwards and then referred on because there's no self-testing that's licensed in South Africa at the moment, and the tests were prototypes, so we didn't want to use the results. And in terms of the first question, quality assurance, well, because there was no results, we didn't need to do that in terms of the results, but part of the process of testing the self-tests was to do a checklist and to make sure that the person went through the full process of the self-test. I'm not sure that I've answered your question.
Yes. Is there any consideration about pre-test counseling?
Pre-test counseling?
Yeah.
As part of the study?
Yes.
So people were not pre-test counseled, but they were provided a lot of information as part of the informed consent and the ethics process, which was taken into consideration.
I think we've got time for 1 or 2 quick questions. Anybody at the microphone? Yeah? They're supposed to say it, but yes.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. This is very interesting. I would like to know that this is just a project or will be led by the community in the future. That's the first. And the second is, did you find any obstacle or barriers when, I saw that people, many young MSM came to your project, but is you find any barrier or obstacle to them to access the mobile clinic or something like that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The first question, people really like this project and I'm really happy. But then at the end of 3 months, they're like, and what's next? And I'm like, well, we have to analyze the data, but the websites keeps going, all the social stuff. But, so sustainability is an issue. And the NGO we're working with has no money, and the Thai government that we're working with also has no money. So, the little money that I have is funding my researchers who are doing the research arm that's collecting the last bit of data in order to analyze it, so that we can write it up and ask for more money. So yeah, that's a problem right now, and they want to do more smart groups and more publicity events. So I'm actually looking for money. So if anyone has money, but yeah, I've been talking to a lot of people locally in terms of finding additional funds to keep this going, because it's not just the research, right? And then the second question, the barriers. So far, we haven't encountered anything. I did a focus group with a couple of, with some men who were part of the study, part of the 140, just to ask about what you thought about the process and barriers and what went wrong, and my researchers, how did they treat you, stuff like that, and it was all really positive. So far so good.
Microphone 4, a quick question.
Hi, yeah, it is a quick question. Tim Lane, thanks for the shout out for our project. One of the debates at our project in South Africa is how closely to associate the project and the project space with HIV testing. Did you have a similar debate with your group in Thailand?
One more time. So the project space and HIV testing.
Having the project so closely associated with HIV testing. There's a high stigma against HIV testing in South Africa. Did you encounter anything similar?
Interesting. We haven't. And it's been very much like, what cool websites, like cool celebrities come, and cool publicity events, and cool t-shirts, and we have different colors, and and people wanted to be part of that. So far, so good. It hasn't been associated with HIV testing yet, in terms of like the wider community, but they know that there is HIV testing as part of the project. But that's interesting, yeah.
Again, we have about 5 minutes for questions, taking up questions. Yes, please.
Hi. As you know, there's a real issue about the durability of behavioral intervention, the impact over the long period. So I'm just kind of wondering why you only analysed up to 6 months, because it's obviously quite a short time.
So it was more of a funding issue. This was funded by a K award, which for those of you who are familiar with NIH K awards, they don't have a lot of funding. So we were really only able to do a 6-month follow-up. I am planning to try to test this in a randomized trial with a much longer follow-up.
Good afternoon. Speaking to this gentleman, we're doing an MI intervention. We're funded by NIMH, looking at 12 months out, which is really probably where the money is, so to speak, in terms of looking at the durability of this. Can you speak about the components of your MI approach? So many people are talking about sort of motivational approaches, and often they mean quite different things. Can you speak to that briefly?
Yeah, so I think one of the aspects that I guess I feel helped the intervention potentially be effective was that it really differed from the traditional model of how people do counseling in rural Uganda in terms of, normally it's directive counseling. So for a change, people were actually asked, well, what do you think you can do to change your behavior to reduce your risk for HIV? We did make some deviations with sort of traditional motivational interviewing in terms of people had difficulty with the importance and confidence ratings, so we focused more on the confidence ratings because everyone was saying it was important. I'd say probably the biggest thing we focused on was the goal setting and discussing barriers to change and how people could really potentially overcome the barriers if they encountered those barriers. We did not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, may I ask very brief technical questions? What are the follow-up ways as 6 months? Also, do they have previous testing experience? And also, is the 10 minutes on top of the standard of care type of counseling, or just replacing all those?
Okay, so the first, as far as the time, the 10 minutes was replacing standard of care counseling. So in other words, the intervention was taking the same amount of time as standard of care. Sorry, what was your first question?
What is the dropout rate?
Oh, the dropout rate. So it was relatively low. So we only lost about 10% of our sample.
Do they have previous testing experience?
Most had tested at some point in their lives, which was probably because they had been implementing routine testing at this facility for quite a while. But if I remember right, it was something like 40% hadn't had a test in the last year.
Yeah, we have another question.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Did you quantify how many risky events they had after the intervention, or how do you, I know it was self-reported, but was there any measurement of risky events per group in your both groups?
Yeah, so we actually asked them to report how many times they had sex and how many of those times involved condom use for the 3-month measurement window. So we are actually assessing the number of unprotected sex events, which we then look at whether or not they knew their partner's status and whether they were seroconcordant, and then if they were not, those become unprotected events become risky sexual events.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akal. We have time for one quick question.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I have maybe 2 questions that I can slip in.
Quickly.
Very quickly. So just in the key informant interviews, I'd just be curious if lab technicians were included and if their responses were different than what you got as a whole, if maybe you can speak to that. And then I was also interested if you could talk a little bit about, in your questions that you asked, how you address that self-testing isn't a diagnosis. So in some of the responses, I think there was some different, it came out a little bit like there might be some different thinking about that from the respondents. So I just wanted to know more about the questionnaire and how that information was provided.
Okay. We didn't interview lab technicians for the key informant interviews. Lab technicians form part of the service providers that we interviewed for the survey interviews. I didn't get your second question. If you could just repeat it, please.
I think within self-testing, when we talk about it, we talk about how it is a initial test that doesn't provide a diagnosis, so a positive result needs confirmation. And so with the respondents, I just was curious with some of the quotes that were up, like how that message was communicated, or if that was communicated in the questionnaire.
Okay, yeah, so this study that we did was an hypothetical scenario. I mean, we just showed the participants how the kit looks like, so it might have not explored, the actual use of the kit. So it was very hypothetical in that respect. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thanks again, Susan, for the very informative presentation. We have, again, we can take up a few questions.
Thank you. Jan Huiblands, Amsterdam. Do you have figures about, it's of course nice that it was popular by first-time testers. Do you have different return rates among groups that were first-time testers and second, third time?
We still need to analyse the data to interrogate it for that.
Would be interesting.
That will be an interesting thing to look at, yeah.
If you compare self-sampling and testing at a lab with home testing, where do you see the differences and benefits of one or the other?
The largest, sorry, more to the microphone. The data that we're receiving from the larger study indicates that people who are less likely to test are reporting that they find this a more convenient way of doing it, and people who potentially wouldn't otherwise go to a GUM clinic or to a GP surgery are potentially saying that they find this acceptable. So we don't think it's the only answer, but we think it's another tool in the portfolio of ways in which people can access HIV testing.
And I think he was asking, how would you compare that with the self-testing? How would you compare that with the possibility of self-testing? Have you any idea of preferences or?
Well, obviously, people may be aware that the law changed in the UK on the 1st of April this year, so that home testing potentially will become a possibility in the future. But obviously, with home sampling, one of the advantages we felt of that is that we still have access to people and we can still support them and we can still have some sense of whether or not they're in care or not, if they're reactive, if their test comes back reactive. And so there is that sort of additional layer of support for people, whereas with home testing there isn't necessarily that.
Is this on? Yeah. Given what you've found through this work, what do you think will happen in terms of home sampling being a big or a small part of the future operation that you would like to see in the UK? And can I also ask you about the costing of it? What you think about the costs?
Well, the cost of home sampling is significantly less than the cost of having a test in a GUM clinic. The cost of the home sampling in our study was £30, which is relatively low. And I think, you know, as I've said, it's part of the portfolio. I think some people would prefer to access a test in the privacy of their home or wherever they choose to do it and get the sample back. Other people would prefer to go to a clinic and receive a full spectrum of support and people around them when they do it. So I guess it's part of what we need to offer people and to give them choice and flexibility in the future.
I have a follow-up to that question. If you consider cost for staffing the service, administering sending it out, rather than just the cost of the actual test, have you got an estimation of that?
Well, the £30 cost included all the laboratory work as well. Potentially there's some add-on costs for the work that the charity is doing in terms of that, but that was the cost of the service for the test.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we'll take up one last, I think this might be the last very brief question, right?
Did you validate the test with the best sample with the regular sample to see the difference before you conduct this study?
We didn't do it before, no, but it's potentially that we'll do that afterwards.
Because I saw there's some difference in terms of the sensitivity of the test.
Okay, thanks again, Susan. So we have all our 5 wonderful speakers, and we have about 15 minutes left for more thinking. And I think Rachel is from WHO, is very experienced in this area. And so I think it would be nice to have a few comments and suggestions.
Well, I just want to, on behalf of all of us, to thank our speakers. I think it's given us a lot of food for thought. I think we've got some great ideas for reaching gay men, and I think both the Thailand and the UK experiences seem very hopeful. And I want to congratulate you both for that work. And I'm also very interested in the motivational interviewing. I think we long know that the PITC approach probably could be augmented and made better. And I think your initial findings are very hopeful. And as you say, I hope you get funded for your large study with long follow-up. Very interesting as well that across the board we seem to have high interest in self-testing and potentially high acceptability. I think really now the proof will be when we start to roll this out, and I think this is sort of an urge for lots more implementation of this so we can really learn. I think it's very difficult, the hypothetical, than what will actually happen in practice. So I think this has been a great session, and I really want to thank all the presenters.
Yeah, we can still have some time for some free points. Just 30 seconds from myself. I would like very much to see all the efforts, the lessons learned being accumulated. It now seems everyone is trying on their own anew, right? So WHO may have some way to put all this lessons learned into a record in a systematic way, and people doesn't have to do their own new things again. Okay, please.
Thank you. Implementing home testing in the Netherlands, the discussion is very much about how to link people up to care as a next step if necessary. I wouldn't like to leave this room without some discussion about that with qualified people there and there. So my question is, how hard a problem do we think it is?
Does anyone else from the audience want to respond? I think that was an open question to anybody. Obviously, this is a concern for all of us, that linkage from that first initial screening test for the confirmation and care. Because we have so little experience at the moment, I think that's going to be a key element of all the pilots that are planned and hopefully planned. Anyone in the audience would like to add to that, or maybe?
Maybe I might not answer your question, but I would just like to let you know that there's a follow-on study on impact evaluation on the formative assessments that we did that will actually look at issues of linkage to care and other aspects of HIV self-testing. So probably once they're done, maybe we might have some information on that.
Is it on? Can you hear? Okay. Sorry. I think to some extent, we have to test it out and see. I think that my view is that I think we should welcome a wider portfolio of services that give people the option. And I think we won't really know until we test it out. Clearly, it's important that we don't lose people to care, but it may well be that these people that wouldn't have got tested anyway. So, anything that we can roll out to encourage more people to get tested, then I think the better. Clearly, carefully evaluating the progress of that. Okay.
But would it be possible, sorry to dominate this discussion so much, which I truly love. Would it be possible, technically, without breaking confidentiality, to have the people, for instance, in your website who order a test outcome, order a test and then get the outcome, to do a follow-up and see if what the outcome is and ask them to come along or whatever.
That could potentially...
That type of... sorry.
That could potentially be a further piece of work involving some case study research around people who found the service helpful or not, so that we can just learn more about what it feels like to use the service. But I think, we need to roll out a wider portfolio of services to give people the choice and work to make them better and better and meet people's needs more fully. And if we find we are losing people to care, then maybe we need to think about that, and we need to think about how we can evolve tests in such a way that we don't lose them to care, that we have a better process. This might just be the first generation of learning around home sampling and home testing.
Just to your question as well as to the panel, I know there is a paper that was published in JAMA by Peter McPherson, and his results were presented at CROI, I think, 2 years ago. And so this paper kind of talks about home initiation and that as being an effective approach with home self-testing. So I would just, as a reference, we can... Yeah, in Atlanta. And I have kind of two questions. One to you, Rosemary, about... in terms of what you learned and what you're kind of planning to reach the heterosexual population the next time around, and also to you as well about the Kenya work. The comments, I wanted to follow up on just how you think the user envisions coming to a facility where they don't want to test in a facility with someone, but they want to get a self-test, and just if there was any context of how they envisioned that process or how they would get a test. Any context you could give, I think, would be very interesting, because it seems a little contradictory to want to get a self-test at a facility but not want to go to test.
From Malawi, there are a number of studies that Wellcome Trust has also done on self-testing. And I want to first maybe thank you all for all the innovations in self-testing, because I think this is very critical as we move into the future. One way of trying to address the issue of linkage to care, I think, is to make sure that we learn from each of the emerging models and from what we have been doing. For example, you had mentioned the PITC. I think what we need to do is to maybe borrow from what we've been doing. For example, we've got community health workers. Why don't we use those to bring up, or they are like a link point with the communities as they do their home testing. Once they are positive, then they can share the study, they find the results with a community health care person who then take them and link them to care. I think that's one of the ways that's coming up. So instead of just using one model, let's look at our context, what is coming out from our communities, and then we refine to suit the context, and that's one way. Thank you.
Yeah, hi there, I'm George from HIV Scotland. We've spent the last year compiling a report about self-testing in Scotland, and it's very detailed analysis working with community and researchers and clinicians in Scotland about what would it look like to have self-testing, be it supported and unsupported. And we published that, it's on our website if you're interested. I was very interested to hear, Jerry, your work. It's Jerry, yep, your work, and Rosemary, obviously the THT's work influenced a lot what we're doing in Scotland. But one of the things that stood out to us when we did this was one story of a young man who tested a self-test. He bought it before they were legally available in the UK. And he, after a year, he said to us, I didn't want to see anyone. I would never have got tested, never have gone to a clinic. I bought this test because it's what I wanted to do. I was depressed anyway. I wasn't going to talk to anyone. A year afterwards, I went and told my doctor I've got HIV. So that was one of the stories that really changed how we saw self-testing and what opportunities it has. And now in Scotland, we've developed a consultative committee who's setting up some pilot projects and things with government and clinicians. So I'd love to talk to people more about how that emerges. And if you are more interested, we're presenting how we came up with this at 1 p.m. tomorrow in the Global Village in the EU zone.
Thank you. My question goes to Dr. Okal. I just wanted to get his views on what the policymakers thought about the challenges or concerns regarding rollout of the oral self-tests in the country.
Okay. First, I would like to let you know that the Ministry of Health was actually central to conducting the formative research that we did in Kenya. And as I just mentioned, 3IE is in the process of selecting awardees for the impact evaluation that is going to be done as a follow-on of the formative research. And again, the Ministry of Health is deeply involved in this, and they're interested. So they're just awaiting for the results of the impact evaluation, and once the results are out, I think a determination will be made as to whether HIV self-testing is being rolled out in Kenya or not.
Okay. So, yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Sue Mavid-Zenge from RTI International. I just had a couple of comments, really. The first one related to the question about linkage to care, and just to say that really it's definitely of concern, but there's really very little data out there, and the study that Cheryl referred to in Malawi is one of perhaps the only rigorously evaluated studies on linkage to care. There's been a little bit of data from Europe over the years that has shown, just to say in Malawi, they definitely showed that the linkage to care was not as good as when tests were conducted in a provider-delivered setting. And so there was the necessity for something further, something else, another type of intervention. Whereas there's been, I mean, really small numbers, but data from Europe which indicated that actually linkage to care was quite good. So this may be a contextual issue, and I think it's, you know, it's something that is still an outstanding research question. And then just a quick comment on the work in Kenya. I was also a little bit surprised that that the preference was for distribution through public health facilities, and I'm not familiar really with the context in Kenya in terms of the accessibility of these public health facilities, but I just wondered whether part of that had to do with it just being a new intervention, and whether when people become more familiar with self-testing, if other distribution methods might become more preferable.
Any? Yes?
Yeah. We were also a little bit surprised by the results, but 2 other studies that were conducted also supported the view that most people would like to access the HIV self-tests from the public sector. Part of the reason, I'm just speculating, part of the reason I think is that HIV, service provision for HIV has long been associated with the public sector. So it's most likely that people have more confidence in getting similar services from the public sector. This is something to be explored further, but this is just what I'm thinking with regards to preference for the public health facilities. Sorry? Correct, yeah. If you saw in my presentation, issues of cost also came up, as to why they wanted to access the services from the public health facility.
So that came up in the South African context as well. We were also surprised. We're still in the process of analysing that data, but the public health facility came up strongly, but it came up strongly in the context of a freely available test. And where people were talking about a willingness to buy, then they were talking about alternative sites. So a number of people mentioned different types of stores, vending machines, and alternative options, but where public health facilities were mentioned, it was mentioned in the context of a free test.
Thank you, everyone. I think we all agree that it has been a very dynamic session, and a lot of issues, ideas have been generated. My small question is that people come sometimes to be first testers and sometimes repeated testers, and the content of counseling and all this should be different, but we might not have time to address these issues, but I think we would like to see more tailored for, because some studies show that actually repeated testers have higher risk instead of lower risk in some studies, right? So thanks to all our speakers, wonderful, marvelous speakers and audience, and we conclude the session. Let's thank ourselves. And there's another oral poster session, which would possibly be very interesting as well. Is it tomorrow afternoon, right? So we'll hope to meet you there. And thanks again for coming. And